Hi Adam. Uh, do you hope or plan to implement formal workshops for police members with regards to Islam and its values in order to disband the mistrust and miscommunication that exists between the police and the broader Muslim community?
I think the issue of policing is a really important one. I live a few hundred metres from the flats in Flemington. It's the same flats that, as a result of incidents there, that saw the police being taken to court for unfair policing tactics. And as a result of that, there's been a big, now a new respect project that's arisen out of that to reform the way police deal with people in the community. And this is a block of flats in my area where 50% of the people who live there are Muslim. And I've had people turn up late for meetings in my office because they've been stopped and questioned by the police. Almost always they're African Australians, African Muslim Australians who've been stopped. I've never had it happen for a white Australian who's been late to come to my office because of issues with the police. So I think it's a lot of work that needs to be done. It's primarily responsibility for the state government, state policing, and I'm in the federal parliament, but it's certainly something we've been working on closely with the community organisations and the legal services and indeed the police themselves to try and turn turn attitudes around. And I think that one of the core issues and one of the things that we've got to get beyond is this idea of blaming the victim. And what I see every day in Flemington and generally around in my area of Melbourne is people who are trying to find meaningful jobs or trying to get good education or good training and aren't able to do it. And if you want to get a good job and you can't get one because people aren't even picking up the phone when you ring or aren't even answering your CV because they see a name on it that's the name says Muhammad, they don't answer you, but if it says David, they do call you, then of course people are going to have time on their hands and people are going to be looking for things to do. And what I don't like is then when there's trouble, people, including sometimes the police, end up blaming people who've been trying to do the right thing from the start. So I like the idea. I think we probably even need to go a bit further. It's ultimately a matter for the state government, but the principle behind the question is spot on.
Hi Adam. What policies do you plan to implement to make it easier for small businesses to thrive in Australia?
Yeah, well, we need to do a lot more to make it easier for small businesses to start up and then succeed. And again, in my area of Melbourne that I've got a lot of experience with, if you look back over the last generations, you've seen a lot of small businesses flourish, and you've seen successive waves of migration come to Australia, but different things have happened. You've seen in the area that I represent, in areas like Carlton or Richmond, you've seen Italians then Greeks come after the Second World War, and they set up a lot of small businesses and market gardens and some shops in the area. Were successful, built them up, successful, and they moved on. And then you look at what's happened with the Vietnamese community, setting up small businesses in the area, and a lot of them have continued to thrive as well. And one of the things that I've noticed is in my area with the where we're blessed to have such a large African Australian population, has been that a lot of the small businesses start up and some succeed, but some find it pretty hard. And I think one of the things that's changed in Australia over time is that maybe, I think 30 or 40 years ago, it might have been really easy to just get a shop and start up a business or go and take over a plot of land somewhere in the suburbs and start growing food there and start up a business. But now there are so many requirements that you have to pass before you can even start your business to succeed, that for a lot of people it's a barrier. And so, for example, there was a group that I was working with in the local area. There were some women from the flats who were great cooks, really, really good cooks, and they came together and they wanted to form a little catering enterprise so that they could sell to people working around the area. The food was great. They'd worked out how to produce it and make money from it, and so the budget side was great. And the thing that they fell down on was when it came to all of the requirements around food handling, occupational health and safety, all the forms that needed to be filled out, and all of the requirements that needed to be met. They're things that probably wouldn't have existed 30 or 40 years ago. You didn't need to have a Certificate 2 or a Certificate 3. You didn't need to have such levels of compliance. Now, I don't think that those levels of compliance are going to go away. I think they're going to stay. So what I think we need to do is have, for example, a one-stop shop, a place that you can go that makes it easier for people to learn how to comply with the existing rules and regulations, learn how to get a business plan, learn how to comply with whatever requirements are appropriate to your business. And that needs to be something that is culturally appropriate as well, so that you can match the needs that people have got, and you can understand where the gaps are. So something that's run by the community. So you can just walk in, say, here's my idea, tell me what I need to do to make a successful business thrive here. So I think that's a real gap, and I'm seeing it, a problem with it is that unless we do that, then we run a real risk that there's going to be whole bunches of people here who don't have the small businesses that are necessary to provide that support for the community. I mean, I see in the Vietnamese or the Chinese community all the time, for example, they're now running aged care services for the older members of their community. They own buildings, and they've worked out how to get money from the government to make it all work. That's what we need to do right across the board. The second thing I would say is I think there's a big case for lower taxes for small business as well. I think the small businesses don't tend to make a lot of money, and I think there's a good case for saying they should pay less tax than larger businesses, and less tax than they currently do at the moment.
Hi Adam, I'm concerned about the rising level of racism and vilification against Muslims and other minority groups in Australia. What solutions do you have to offer?
I think you're right to be concerned. I think there's racism and discrimination in Australia, and I think we can't shy away from that. And I think it's important that politicians in particular say, look, no, this is actually happening, and call it out when it happens. I see it happening, as I mentioned before, in areas of employment all the time, like people not even getting job interviews, let alone jobs. You see it in the way people are treated on the street, perhaps by police or perhaps by others. You see it in housing. You see it in the media. And sadly, we see it in Parliament. And especially in election years, it can get really ugly. And I sit next to people in Parliament who seem to have no qualms whatsoever in trying to use race to win votes. And it's bad when it gets ugly. And look, and I spoke to, I've been speaking to members of my community who've said, look, over the last couple of years, in some ways, one person said to me, it was getting almost as bad as back in 2001. And it was starting to feel like that some people didn't want to go out on the streets. Now, that's appalling, and I don't think it represents the majority of Australian opinion, but I think there's a minority that wants to fan it up for their own naked political purposes, and they don't care about what the consequences are. So what do we do about it? Well, first of all, I think we've got to call it out when we see it, and got to condemn it, and just be absolutely unequivocal about it. And there's no room for weasel words when there's racism. You've just got to call it out. Secondly, I think one of the things that we should start doing is, I think it would be great to see more Muslim Australians in Parliament, for example. Like, I think if we start getting people in positions of leadership in the community, then I think it makes it that bit harder to draw on us and them, to divide the community in two when people are in strong leadership positions. And thirdly, I want to make sure multiculturalism and extending that not just to cultural but religious practices as well becomes an enshrined and lived part of everyday Australia. So we've got to defend that wherever it exists. And I think Victoria's probably a bit different to the rest of the country. Like, I think Victoria, we've got something special here, and I think there's not actually that many political parties in Victoria, for example, who try to use race to win votes. And I think we need to defend that and make sure that never changes here in Victoria, and we need to spread that message more broadly. But look, we've just got to be vigilant and just call racism out whenever we see it.
Next question. Many Muslims believe that the media spreads misconceptions about the Islamic community. Does the media label the Muslims unfairly? And shouldn't it be that all individuals who commit crime be labelled by their religion or none at all? Isn't this against the law under the Code of Conduct for Discrimination?
Yeah, look, this is a really good question, and whether or not it's against the law, let's just put that to one side for the moment. But you know, when people commit a crime in this country, then you get prosecuted. If you've done the wrong thing, you get convicted, and you might get a sentence, or you might go to jail. But it seems to be the case that whenever that happens with someone who is Muslim, they always insert the word Muslim in the headline, or they always make a point of saying that. They don't say Christian sentenced for violent acts, whenever that happens to someone. And so I think they're absolutely, I think the questioner is exactly right. There is a case that what's happening in large parts of Australia at the moment is that, and in the media, is that religion gets used to identify people in a way that it just otherwise wouldn't. So religions other than Muslim don't get called out and identified in the same way. So I think it is happening. We saw it after, whenever there are attacks that take place in other parts of the world, you see it mentioned in very, very large print. These people who commit attacks in other parts of the world, I call them terrorists, call them criminals. Their religion is actually not relevant to the fact that they are committing acts that everyone would abhor. And one thing I think that people in Australia don't understand is that there are so many people here in this country who have come here, maybe come here as refugees, who are fleeing exactly this kind of extremism and fleeing exactly this kind of terrorism. And then when here, everyone gets tarred with the same brush. So whether or not it's illegal in some ways kind of doesn't matter. It is wrong, and I think we need to be developing alternative forms of media. They're going to start telling people the truth, and I think we need to work out ways of immunising and inoculating people against what the media is going to say. And so that what you want to get to in Australia is a situation where when someone picks up that paper and it says, and it mentions someone's religion, you want the person reading the paper to say, oh, well, that's irrelevant. That's irrelevant because I know someone who's my workplace or who is my friend or who lives in my street who just doesn't share those beliefs. It's got nothing, their religion is irrelevant. Why are you even mentioning it? That's the situation we need to get to. I'm not sure that we're going to change the media in a hurry, but we can probably start to change people's opinions about what they read in the media.
ICE addicts with little or no money are being told to wait 3 to 6 months for public rehab facilities. In that time, they may die, become homeless, commit more crime and end up in jail, costing taxpayers nationally $2.6 billion yearly to hold prisoners. And 70% of those in Victoria are drug users, which is a lot more than it would cost to invest in more drug reduction programs. If your party were to form government, how will you improve the current system, and what will you do to prevent the supply of drugs and reduce harm and demand of illegal substances?
Look, this issue of drugs and what happens to people who use drugs and when they end up then in prison rather than getting the help they need, and the impact that all of those steps have on the community and their families and friends is really serious, really serious. And it's something that in my office we've been working on for a while. My electorate, this area covers all the inner city suburbs. It's got more public housing than any other electorate in the country, and we know that in some of those areas of public housing, drugs has been a problem. And so over the last few years, we've gone out and held a number of seminars and meetings, primarily for members of the African Muslim community, but open to everyone who wants to come from the public housing areas to actually have some education, because we were finding that a lot of the family members in particular, especially the what was going on with their sons or daughters who were using drugs and didn't know how to get help, didn't know how to have conversations with their kids about it, didn't know where to turn. And so we began a big process of education, and key to that for us is the idea that we've got to look at drugs as a health issue instead of a policing issue. We are not going to be able to arrest our way out of the ICE problem. That is just not going to happen. And if all we do is treat it as a policing issue where you arrest people and put them in jail, we are not going to fix anything. So what would we do if we were in government? Well, we would do what other countries like Portugal have done. And that is, you say, if you are someone who is a dealer, then you still have criminal penalties apply to you. So no leniency for the people who are the dealers. The laws stay the same for them. But for the people who find themselves in possession of drugs, so you've got a small amount of it or you're using it for yourself, then you treat it first of all as a health issue. So instead of the first position being you send them to jail, the first position is you send them to get help. You send them so that they can get off the drug and that they stay out of jail, because we know that often in jail actually the problem continues for many people, but you send them off to get help. Now that's potentially, some people would say, well hang on, aren't you saying for those individuals that it's then illegal? Aren't you making drugs legal? Well no, what we're saying is that individuals who are the users of it, the first step shouldn't be to send them to jail. The first step should be to send them to get help. So if we were in charge, that's what we would do. And we would put more resources into health and into treatment so that anyone who's in trouble, finds themselves using drugs, there's a safe way out and they will be supported. And we do what we can to stop the supply of the drugs in the first place. But people who've got problems with drugs usually have health problems, and they might also have mental health problems as well. They're the people who need our help. So that's how we would change the system. And I think when you look at what has happened in Portugal, it makes a big difference, You have less people becoming addicts, and as a result of that, you have less crime and you have much more stable communities.
The media recently has been portraying Muslims and minority groups and also refugees in a negative way. And some politicians seem to be taking advantage of this situation, and they don't call out the media. They basically try to sort of gain more popularity by agreeing with what the media is doing. How do you propose we can fix this?
One of the things that astounds me in Australia at the moment is the inconsistency of treatment that's going on. On the one hand, we've got new laws being passed by politicians who just want to make every election about fear rather than hope, and who want to divide rather than unite. And they're continually passing new laws that are taking away people's basic rights and making more and more activity in this country criminal activity under the guise of terrorism. And then you get a lot more prosecutions happening there. On the other hand, you have groups, far right-wing groups, that say we are going to make it our mission to attack someone because of their religion, who are found with weapons, who are found preparing acts that, for all intents and purposes, should count as terrorism, and they don't seem to get prosecuted. They certainly don't seem to end up in the papers in the same way. Now, that needs to be condemned and called out by politicians. Politicians need to be saying, hang on, if there's a law here, then it certainly should apply equally. We might disagree with the law in the first place, and we might say that law is too extreme, but if it's there, then apply it equally. Apply it to the far right, who are out there attacking people on the basis of their religion, attacking people on the basis of their race. Apply it to them as well. Don't turn a blind eye to them, because if you keep turning a blind eye to them, then what
what other conclusion are people going to draw in the community other than the law gets applied in a one-sided way? Like, people are going to draw that conclusion as they're looking at this unfair treatment. In Parliament, in New South Wales Parliament, we recently got passed a motion condemning this the acts of these far-right groups and calling on for there to be some equality of treatment. That was moved by the first Muslim woman Member of Parliament in Australia, and that's our Greens Member of Parliament in New South Wales, Marine Faruqi, and she got the Parliament to agree to that. So I think that's a step, and if we keep taking steps in that direction, and if we as parliamentarians not only call out racism but call out inconsistency in law enforcement as well, that might go some way to giving people a bit more confidence that in Australia the law applies equally.